Welcome again to the DEEPMED Seminar, which is a history forum for ocean science, strategy, and environment. The DEEPMED Seminar is brought to you by the DEEPMED project, discovering the deep Mediterranean environment, a history of science and strategy from 1860 to the present. It is a ERC-funded project, which is mainly interdisciplinary and international, as this wonderful team that we have here around the table shows. So thanks also for the attendees from the team who are online and from other teams and other research groups who are also online. We are here for Jeffrey Brodsky's presentation. Usually our seminar is called a history forum. Usually our talks and meetings are rather historical. In this occasion, we have not a history seminar, we have a present concern, a present issue, the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, and we have an independent journalist, Jeffrey Brodsky, to talk us about it. Why? Well, we thought it was interesting to join our historical interest to really important scientific, technological, and geopolitical events happening today. So Jeffrey Brodsky is the only reporter to visit all 4 explosion sites of the Nord Stream sabotage, and I was super interested that he told us how that experience was, being down there with the investigation team. He writes the Un Americano en España column for the Adler, and his writings on the Nord Stream pipeline and other issues have appeared in magazines and newspapers in the US and Europe. And he also reported the investigation findings in a UN meeting this past July. You can find him on Twitter and other networks, and we are very happy to have him here presenting for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then there will be also same time allocated for Q&A. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, once again for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, Lino, thanks a lot for that introduction. It's quite an honor to be here. Like Lino said, I'm going to be talking about the Nord Stream sabotage, and I am the only journalist at all for blast sites. And it's especially an honor to be doing it for the Universidad de Sevilla, because yo estuve muchos años viviendo en Sevilla, and I think I might be el único americano con acento sevillano del planeta. So I'm very happy to speak to you people at the University of Sevilla and everyone else who's joining us remotely as well. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for taking the time. So the Nord Stream sabotage. Let me share my screen here. We can get started. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Nord Stream sabotage today. So what happened on September 26th? On September 26th, aerial images showing the gas welling up to the surface of the Baltic Sea above the Nord Stream pipelines were circulated around the globe. It was probably the most severe act of industrial sabotage in human history. It severed the main artery for affordable energy from Russia to Europe, especially to Germany. And this cheap energy was critical for maintaining Germany's powerhouse industrial base. The European Union warned shortly after the sabotage took place, the explosions were detected. They warned, quote, any deliberate disruption of European energy infrastructure is utterly unacceptable and will be met with a robust and united response, end quote. Shortly after the explosions were detected, 3 countries, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, launched investigations, but with the exception of an initial Swedish assessment that this was, quote, an act of, quote, gross sabotage, none of the 3 countries have released their findings to date. I should also tell you that when I go through this slides, I can't see you. So at any time, if you want to interrupt and ask a question, please do so, and I'm happy to clarify anything. This can be more of an informal talk. Okay, so this is really a whodunit for the ages. Like I said, it's probably the largest active industrial sabotage of all time, but it's also probably the most significant act of eco-terrorism of all time. And of course, as Lino said, this is a very pressing geopolitical mystery for the century, basically. So what are the Nord Stream pipelines? These are pipelines that run from Russia to Europe. They make landfall in Germany. There are two pipelines. There's Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Each of those lines have two lines, line A and line B. So there are 4 lines total. Nord Stream 1 began delivering gas in 2011. Nord Stream 2 never entered service. And the reason it never entered service is because after, in February of 2022, when Russia formally recognized the 2 breakaway regions in Ukraine, Germany canceled its certification. So Nord Stream 2 has never gone online, although it did have gas inside of it when the sabotage occurred. This, of course, is a map of the Nord Stream pipelines. And if you can see here, my cursor, this little island is the Danish island of Bornholm. We're going to be talking a lot about that. It's an important clue for understanding the sabotage. So Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, they begin in Russia up here. They make landfall in Germany down here. And of course, this is the Baltic Sea. So it wasn't just Russia's pipeline that was damaged, that was sabotaged. The owners and stakeholders were from a variety of countries, Western European countries, in addition to Russia. Russia was the majority owner at 51%, but the stakeholders were German, Dutch, and French energy companies. And as you can see on your screen, they were financed by German, French, Austrian, and Dutch companies. And of course, Russia's majority owner, Russia's energy giant Gazprom was the majority owner. So the Nord Stream pipelines are enormously important. Only Nord Stream 1 alone was vastly larger than any other Russian gas pipeline that terminated in Europe. It annually could deliver 59 cubic meters of gas per year. That's an enormous gas pipeline. The day that the pipelines were sabotaged, Germany lost as much as 66% of its gas consumption and 42% of its supply. The surplus of gas was so abundant that Germany could re-export this gas at a profit to neighboring European countries. So the sabotage didn't just affect Germany and Russia, it affected all of Europe and affected all the world because the pipelines played such a large role in the global gas market. So this was a huge, big deal. And a lot of economists are saying that perhaps the very most important reason that Germany has now entered recession is because of the Nord Stream sabotage. There was a huge ecological impact as well. You can see on the screen there how many metric tons of methane were released. Of course, methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Methane is the largest component of natural gas. There was I don't know if anyone saw it, but here in Spain, in the Spanish public television, there was a headline shortly after the sabotage took place on September 26th, 2022. And the headline in the Spanish public television was, and I'm going to read it, it was, quote, Nord Stream leaks emitted the same CO2 as almost all cars in Spain in a year. So this enormous release of methane was the equivalent to all the methane released by all the cars on Spanish roads in 1 year. And again, please feel free to interrupt me if there's any clarifications or questions. So, like Nino said at the beginning, I'm the only journalist to go to all 4 blast sites. And this is the first and only expedition to go to all 4 blast sites. We were able to obtain underwater drone footage and sonar images of all the blast sites, which is very important. I'm going to tell you why it's really important to go to one blast site specifically. And I also retrieved sediment samples from the bottom of the seafloor at one of the blast sites, and I later took those to a laboratory in Germany to have those tested. So I don't know if any of you know much about my background, but I don't have a background really in journalism. I'm not a formally trained journalist. So it was sort of ironic that I was invited to participate in this independent expedition to the blast sites. Why was that? Well, basically, on September 26, 2022, the day of the sabotage, I was shocked that it had happened, and I was frustrated that it appeared to me that the mainstream media was not really asking tough questions, and I didn't see any serious investigations taking place in the mainstream media. So just kind of independently as a private citizen, I read as much about the sabotage as I could. I learned as much about it as I could. I started interviewing members of European parliaments. I started interviewing other journalists. I started talking to scientists. And when I felt I had learned enough about it, I started pitching some of my ideas for articles and research projects to magazines and newspapers, and I eventually won a grant. Shortly after I published an article or 2 about the sabotage, I met on Twitter a Swedish engineer. His name is Irmak Ertör. And Irmak Ertör, with his own money, chartered a boat and bought a underwater drone. And I met him on Twitter, and he invited me on the expedition, so I was actually quite lucky about it. I shared some of my findings with him. He found it interesting, and he shared some of his findings with me. The boat was equipped with a sonar device that allowed us to capture sonar images of the blast sites, and it also had what you call like a side-scope sonar, an external sonar, and we towed this sonar about 150 meters behind the boat and about 68 meters above the seafloor to capture sonar images of the blast site. So it was completely independent, not sponsored by a government or any think tank or organization of the expedition. So here is our route. This in the middle here, this is the Danish island of Bornholm. And these inverted red drops here, these are the blast sites. So there's one blast site here that is southeast of the island, of this island, Danish island of Bornholm, and the other 3 blast sites are here northeast of the island. Here are the approximate geocoordinates of the blast sites. So the goals of the expedition, I'm happy to say that they were all reached. The most important goal to all of us is that the public had never seen drone footage or sonar images of the blast sites. So they'd only seen images of one of the blast sites because the BBC commissioned an expedition in October. But they only went to one blast site. And they made a big mistake, and they actually didn't find a blast site. What they found were ruptures in the pipelines, damages in the pipelines, but they didn't actually locate a place where the bombs went off. And I'm going to explain why that was so important and such a big mistake. So we wanted to share this data with the public, and we did. And specifically, we wanted to know the amount of explosives used in the attack. In other words, how many kilograms of explosives were used, The type of the charges were these linear shaped charges or cutting charges, as they're called, or these canonical charges, or they just simply slabs of explosives or bulk explosives. And we wanted to know where the bombs were placed. Were they placed on the pipeline, under the pipeline, next to the pipeline? And by finding all these things out, we were able to draw accurate conclusions about how the sabotage was carried out, how the operation was carried out. This is really the most important part here. So these here, these red circles are 3 blast sites, and this is 1 blast site down here. If you see, the first explosion was detected by seismologists at 2:03 a.m. on the 26th of September. Then 17 hours later, there were 3 more explosions. This is very important to remember that these explosions were separated by 17 hours. You can see here, this green is Nord Stream 1, this blue line is Nord Stream 2, and they each have a line, line A and line B, so they're dual lined, 4 lines total. This bottom red circle here, 1, 2, 3, this third circle, the lowest one, this is the blast site of Nord Stream 2, line A, in the exclusive economic zone of Sweden. This is the key. This blast site is the key to understanding everything. Why? Because it was blown up twice. There was a mistake in the sabotage, and the saboteurs, which were almost certainly divers, made a mistake, and they placed the bomb on this line twice. Once at 2:03 a.m., and then for the second time at 7 p.m., 17 hours later. So they blew up 1 line, that is Nord Stream 2 line A, 2 times. It was mistaken sabotage, and this is the key to understanding the operation. So this is a underwater drone picture of Nord Stream 2, line A in the Swedish economic zone. If you go back here, it is this third red circle, the line that was blown up twice. This is a picture of the line the second time it was blown up. It was blown up in one area, 75 kilometers away. And then this one, it was blown up 17 hours at a different section, 75 kilometers distance away. This hole, this is a hole in the pipe. It is about 2.5 meters. So it's a pretty small puncture wound. It's just a hole. And this is a drone image from our expedition. If you look at this picture, this is the same line. Okay? Excuse me. If you look at this picture, this is the same line, but it is in the Danish zone 75 kilometers apart. So let's compare the damage in the 2 lines. You can just see here, this is just a hole or a puncture wound. But this looks like it was cut or a clean break. This is actually the same line. So this picture on the left is Nord Stream 2 line A in the Swedish zone. This picture on the right is Nord Stream 2 line A in the Danish zone. These are 75 kilometers apart, and they were blown up 17 hours difference in time. This one on the right was blown up 17 hours earlier than this one on the left. And that is the reason that the damage you can see, the visible damage, is so different. Because this damage on the right is not primary damage. What do I mean by that? This is not damage that was just caused by a bomb. This image on the right, just caused by explosives. This is a combination, this image on the right, it's a combination of the damage caused by the bombs themselves, the explosives, and the rapid depressurization of the gas. In other words, the gas rapidly being released from the pipe, escaping from the pipe. This on the left This damage is what you would call primary damage, because this damage is just a result of the bomb, not a combination of the bomb and the rapid depressurization of the pipe, or the pressurized gas rapidly being released from the pipe due to a hole or a puncture. So when I showed this image on the left to experts, they were able to calculate, they were able to tell me things about the operation, about the amount of explosives used in kilograms, where the bomb was placed, and the type of charges that were used. If you show experts images on the right, it's difficult for them to see because here is the missing part of the pipeline. Some of these missing parts, some of these ruptures were 50 or even 250 meters wide. So you don't, by showing these images to experts, they can't tell you exactly where the bomb was placed. They can't tell you how much of this damage was caused by the rapid depressurization or how much was caused by just the explosives themselves. And they can't tell you how many kilograms of explosives were used because the damage is not just a result of the bombs themselves, and because the hole or the rupture is too big. It's anywhere from 50 to 250 meters, depending on the place of the pipeline. On the left, we were able to measure the damage, and experts were able to say, with these measurements, where the bombs were placed, how the amount of explosives that were used, and the type of charges that were used. So when the BBC and other mainstream media went to the blast sites, their images all look like this on the right, and that is why some inaccurate conclusions were drawn about the sabotage. So these are, this is some measurements that were done. This is all Nord Stream 2, line A, the exclusive economic zone of Sweden, the line that was blown up twice, once 17 hours before and then 17 hours later. And you can see the puncture wound is quite small. And again, it looks drastically different than this image on the right. These are anaglyph 3D images. You actually need those 3D glasses that kids like to have sometimes to appreciate these images. You can see a lot of these on my Substack and on my website and my Twitter. These are again images. The hole was about 2.5 meters wide, so a pretty small puncture wound at Nord Stream 2, line A, in the Swedish zone. So, as I said, one of the main objectives of the expedition was to figure out the amount of explosives used in the attack. It was previously reported in mainstream media, in the New York Times, I think in the Times of London, the BBC, probably in the Spanish media as well, major in mainstream media outlets, that there were upwards of 500 kilograms of TNT used at each blast site. But that was vastly overestimated and erroneous. Why was it overestimated? One, like I told you, when the rupture sites, whether they're 50 meters or whether 250 meters, they were too big to determine exactly where the bombs were placed and what type of damage the bombs reaped or produced. And the second reason is that the seismic signatures from the blast sites, in fact, I have those written down here. Let me see if I can find those. I will try to find them for you in a minute, but the seismic signatures on the Richter scale were enormous. So people thought, experts thought, that the seismic signatures, the seismic activity, was produced just by the bombs themselves, but they weren't. It was a combination of the bombs themselves and the rapid depressurization of the gas. In other words, the gas escaping from the pipelines. And that is what produced such a huge seismic signature in two occasions, once 17 hours before and then 17 hours later. But these seismic signatures were not a result of the bombs or the explosives. They were a result, again, of the depressurization of the gas. So this led people to vastly overestimate by as much as 10 or 50 times the amount of explosives used in the attack. And if you look here at the bottom of this slide where it says clue, well, a clue to figuring out who blew up the pipelines is that if you have a small amount of explosives, you probably wouldn't need as big as a boat as initially reported. Maybe it wasn't the state, maybe it was private actors, and it was probably easier for divers to dive down with a smaller amount of explosives that was than 500 kilograms that was previously reported. And as I said, erroneously, inaccurately reported. So where were the bombs placed, and what do these clues tell us? The experts that I've interviewed, and I interviewed the explosive, the managing director of an explosive engineering company. I interviewed ex-US Navy SEALs, master demolitions technicians, people who have actually carried out these type of operations for the U.S. government, and people who have been involved in covert operations for the U.S. government where explosives were used and where, frankly, the U.S. government carried out acts of sabotage. So when I show them the data, and especially when I show them, and we'll go back to this, when I show them this picture, which again is the depressurized site, the site that was blown up after most of the gas had escaped and after the pipeline was much less pressurized than before, if not. In fact, it had lost almost all of its pressure. They were able to tell me that the bomb was placed here, buried slightly underneath the pipeline, next to the pipeline, and buried, but the hole was not too deep. So that knowing where the placement, so knowing where the bombs were placed, this leads us to clues to help us to understand how the sabotage was executed, how the operation was carried out. So the clue is that it was probably the work of a diver, not an underwater drone or submarine, because the bombs were slightly buried and placed under the pipeline. So, as I said, the seismic signatures were quite big. The first one had a Richter scale. On the Richter scale, the magnitude was 1.9, and then the explosion took place 17 hours later northeast of the island of Bornholm. The magnitude was 2.3. But this Richter scale magnitude was, as I said, much more the result of the depressurization of the pipes than of the bombs themselves. So the type of the charges used. Let's go back to our pictures. When I show pictures to explosive experts, to ex-US Navy SEALs, to master demolitions technicians, to elite special forces operators, and to the managing director of an engineering company, and I showed them this image on the right, they said, well, this is probably a shaped or cutting charge because the cut is clean. But when I showed this image to them on the left, they told me it was probably just bulk explosives or slabs of explosives, which are much more primitive and rudimentary and less sophisticated. So originally, when it was reported erroneously in the mainstream media that it was probably shaped or cutting charges. And that may be the case for some of the blast sites, but it's certainly not the case for this blast site on the left, this depressurized site, because as you can see, the hole it's not cut, it's not a sharp or clean break. This on the right, like I said, again, this damage is probably not the result of a shaped or cutting charge. This is simply just a pipeline rupturing, breaking in large places due to the enormous release of pressure. So I don't know if any of you have, a garden or a patio, maybe you have a hose on your garden or patio. If you imagine you're holding a hose, and it has a lot of water running through it, or like you're a firefighter, you have that big hose, and the pressure is so much in the hose that if you release the hose or you let go of the hose, it starts to dance around wildly like a snake or like a windsock blowing in the wind. It's very violent. Well, that violent movement and that violent displacement is actually what caused the pipeline to rupture in these huge places, like 50 meters of pipe missing, 250 meters of the pipe missing, other places. Not the bombs themselves. It was that huge violent displacement of the pipe being lifted off of the bed of the seafloor and breaking apart, just like is if you were holding a hose or you're a firefighter and suddenly you release that hose that's pressurized with the water coming out. And also remember, this isn't a a bendable or malleable material. These pipelines were built of steel. So when they were thrown about violently in the sea, they cracked. So let's go back for a second here to also the placement. So one thing I should have said about the placement of the charges that was very important for us to know. These pipelines, let me get the correct information here. So these pipelines, they're steel pipelines, and they have walls that are about 4 centimeters, and they're coated with another 6 to 11 centimeters of steel reinforced concrete, depending on the place. What we learned, if you look here on the screen, that these pipelines were placed on the seam. The seam of the pipeline is only polyurethane foam covered by sheet metal. In other words, it doesn't have that steel reinforced concrete. So if you're a diver or you're the saboteur or you're the person who wants to blow up these pipelines and you want to use the smallest amount of TNT or explosives possible, you want to place the bomb on the seam because the seam is much weaker and much easier to compromise or break or blow up or rupture. So we figured out with our sonar, with the sonar images, and I'm going to show you some of those, we figured out that the bomb on Nord Stream 2 line A in the Swedish line was actually placed on the seam. So again, this would lead us to believe that the operation was smaller and less sophisticated than was originally reported in the mainstream media. We talked about the type of charges. So again, if you look at this, here is a picture of the BBC, and this is Nord Stream 1 line 8. And if you look at this again, it looks like a clean cut. And the reason that it looks like a clean cut is because this is not a result of, again, of the bombs or the explosives. This is a result of the pipeline breaking apart when it was violently displaced by the depressurization. So if you look at this image, which is a BBC image, and you go back and look at these two images, which are images from our expedition, the BBC image looks like this. And that is why originally it was misreported and misunderstood, the amount of charges that were used in the blast, the type of charges, and the placement of the bombs were erroneously reported previous to our expedition, because this Nord Stream 2 line A in the Swedish zone is the key to being able to draw accurate conclusions about the sabotage. So this is why the amount of explosives were previously misunderstood and inaccurately reported. It's why experts couldn't tell us where the bombs were placed, and it's why experts didn't know that it was, at least definitely Nord Stream 2 line A in the Swedish zone, why it wasn't cutting or shaped charges. It was probably just bulk or slabs of explosives, which are much more rudimentary, much more primitive, so to speak. So I don't know if you can see, maybe someone can put on the microphone and tell me, can you see what I'm holding in my hand here?
Yes, we can see.
Does anyone want to guess or tell me what I'm holding? Someone want to unmute their microphone and tell me?
Looks like a grenade.
I'm sorry?
Looks like a grenade from here.
Okay, it looks like a grenade.
Yeah.
This is actually sediment samples that we retrieved from the bottom of the Baltic Sea, the seafloor, within 1 to 5 meters of the blast site. This is actually sediment that we retrieved. So a colleague and I took these to a laboratory in Germany, and we had them test it for explosive traces. And this is a picture of me on the boat holding these sediment samples that we captured. Here's a picture of me at the laboratory preparing the samples, and on the right here is the tubes that we had the samples in. So the samples, as you can see here, they did not detect any explosive traces. There may be a logical reason for this. We collected these samples in May. The sabotage took place in September. So this is 8-9 months after the sabotage took place. The Baltic Sea has currents. The depth was approximately 80 meters. Any traces could have dispersed. The other reason is that there are many types of explosive, analyses that the laboratories can do for you, and maybe we didn't get the right type of analysis, but I don't think that's likely because all of the experts that I consulted recommended the analysis that we had done. One reason that these samples didn't detect any explosive traces might be is that Sweden has already cleaned up the crime scene. As I said, 3 countries are investigating this: Germany, Sweden, and Denmark. And we know that Sweden has been to the blast sites on at least 2 occasions. How do we know this? Well, I interviewed Trond Larsen. His name is Trond Larsen. He's the submersible drone operator that was commissioned by the BBC and by the Swedish newspaper called Expressen. And you can read his quote here at the bottom of the screen. He says, when Expressen released those pictures, media attention picked up again. I don't know why, but the Swedes closed off the area for some days and did some more investigations after that point. But it was just a few days after us. So he told me this. He is an eyewitness to Sweden being at the crime scene at least twice. It's been reported publicly in open sources that Sweden has removed materials from the crime scene, large amount of materials, debris, pieces of the pipeline themselves. So what can these materials and debris that Sweden removed, what can they tell us about the operation? When I was speaking to Larsen, one of the things that he told me is I asked him, if he believed it was possible that only Swedish investigators have enough material to draw accurate conclusions about the operation. He said, quote, it would not surprise me if that was the case. So Sweden seems to be, let's say, not publicly sharing all the information that they have. The other thing, besides, the circumstances were very suspicious with these labs. I contacted approximately a dozen labs throughout Europe. I was told, and it didn't seem like a lot of these laboratories wanted to service me, wanted to do this analysis that I had requested. All of these labs were for-profit labs, so it was even more bizarre and suspicious why these labs wouldn't want my money. For example, I had been speaking with a lab in Madrid here in Spain, and they told me that they couldn't do the type of analysis that I needed. They said they didn't offer that, but I know that they were not telling the truth because these analysis is advertised on their website, and the explosive, managing director of the explosive engineering company, one of my sources, told me that he had worked with this lab before and they had done this test. I was emailing with another lab in Denmark, and I was about to fly from Spain to Denmark to deliver the samples to them. And I'd be emailing with them and confirming that they could do the type of analysis that I needed, the correct type of laboratory test. And suddenly I received an email from them that said, no, we can't service you. And they gave me no explanation. Another laboratory here in Spain told me that I should immediately take the samples, call the Spanish police, and give the samples to the Spanish police because they said it was illegal to have explosive traces in your house and illegal to transport them. But this surprised me, and it surprised the managing director of the explosive engineering company, because he, according to his knowledge, according to European Union law and United Kingdom law, for scientific purposes, people can have samples that may or may not contain explosive traces in their house, in their laboratory, and they can transport them. So that was odd, that was strange that they wanted me to immediately call the Spanish police because I wasn't doing anything illegal. So those were some suspicious circumstances surrounding the lab. Also, finally, when we did find a lab in Germany that agreed to do this, I delivered the samples to them. I think it was June 16th, I delivered the samples to them. They told me that I would receive my results in about 10-15 business days. I called them about 10-15 business days after that to inquire about the status of my requested analysis. They told me they didn't know who I was. They told me I had no customer number, and they told me they couldn't locate my samples. This was shocking to me and frustrating. So after exchanging about 5 or 6 frustrating emails with them, they finally located my samples. It turns out that they were still in the office's refrigerator. They had never been delivered to the laboratory. And then they suddenly realized that they knew who I was. So I then requested the analysis again, gave them all the same information that I provided the first time when I visited the lab in person, or had been at their offices in person. And then finally they did the test for me, and surprise, surprise, there were no explosive traces detected. So I'm not sure they ever had any intention of detecting explosive traces for me. Luckily, I still have some samples, so I might bring them to a different lab in a different country. So that's the story about the laboratory. As I said, but there's something else I'd like to share with you. As I said, the main objectives of the expedition were to figure out the amount of explosives used, the placement of the bombs, and the type of charges used. We did all that. But there was something that we didn't know that we were going to discover. As I said, that Nord Stream, there's Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, and they each have 2 lines, line A and line B, so 4 lines total. One of the lines, which is Nord Stream 2, line B, it was not damaged in sabotage. It remains intact to this very day. And this was one of the mysteries, is why would the saboteurs why would they leave one line intact? And if you look at the bottom of this screen, a lot of people who thought Russia was behind this, they said they intentionally left one of the lines intact so they could use it as geopolitical leverage, a bargaining chip amid the war in Ukraine. But it appears we now know why this line remains intact. It was a mistake. There are these massive power cables lying on the seabed near these blast sites, and they can distort the Earth's magnetic field to such an extent that a compass can provide a false reading up to 180 degrees. So you think you're going in one direction, but you're going in the exact opposite direction. So if you're a diver, you can lose your sense of direction. This actually happened to our drone operator. He thought he was going one way, but he was going the exact opposite way. The Earth's magnetic field was giving his compass false readings on the underwater drone. This also happened to the BBC drone operator, Trond Larsen. So this is probably why these 2 lines, one of the lines remains intact. It was probably left intact by mistake. So This is a sonar image of the blast site of Nord Stream 2 line A. So this is the sonar image. It's the sonar image of this blast site, Nord Stream 2 line A, the depressurized site, the one that was blown up twice by accident. You can see here the crater that the outrushing gas and the, not much from outrushing gas because this was the depressurized site, but that the explosion, the bombs created. And so here is the line. Here's the line here. This is Nord Stream 2 line A in the Swedish zone. And just 50 meters this way, in this direction, which is south, the line B remains intact. So these two lines are only 50 meters away. So it's very easy for a diver, if his compass was giving him false readings, to make a mistake and blow up the same line twice. The other thing is that if you look at any of the videos that are on any of my articles or my website, you can see here there's like dust or sediment. And if we have time, I can show you a video. Every time the drone gets near the seabed or the seafloor, near the pipeline, it lifts up sea sediment and it creates this like mud-colored cloud. And this can, of course, obstruct a diver's vision. It obstructed the vision of our drone. So when the diver was burying this very shallow, not deep hole next to the pipeline, he or she was kicking up sea sediment. Was raising sea sediment, and this obscured his or her vision, obstructed his or her vision. So if the diver's vision was obscured and his or her compass was giving him a false reading, you can see, and the fact that the lines were only 50 meters apart from each other, you can understand why the second line remains intact, why one line was blown up twice. It was probably a mistake in the operation. And this would lead us to believe that, again, the operation was not as sophisticated or complicated as originally reported. Because when I spoke to military experts and divers, they told me that a professional military diver with many years of experience probably would have been able to recalibrate his compass. So the big question everyone wants to know is, how am I doing on time, everybody? Are we okay on time?
Yes, we are. I mean, yeah.
Okay. So who is responsible for the attack? This is what kind of everyone wants to know. Is the United States the author of the attack? Well, there are economic reasons. There have been public remarks made by American officials, including Joe Biden, and of course there are geopolitical reasons. Let me read to you some of the public statements. Joe Biden was asked during a press conference, he was asked, how are you going to stop the Nord Stream pipelines? And he said, quote, if Russia invades, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. The reporter then pressed President Biden and said, well, how will you do that? How will you bring an end to Nord Stream pipelines? And he smiled and smirked and said, trust me, we'll be able to do it. Antony Blinken, the current US Secretary of State, said that shortly after sabotage, that the sabotage was in no one's interest. But then on the same day, he also said the sabotage was a huge opportunity. And what he meant, it was an opportunity for United States liquid natural gas companies, because the United States has now become the world's leading export of liquid natural gas. And a lot of this natural gas is being exported to Europe. So American companies are making a lot of money. Of course, the geopolitical issues. These pipelines probably gave Russia leverage over the West and Europe amid the war in Ukraine. And so by destroying the pipelines, you reduce some of Russia's geopolitical leverage. Is Ukraine behind the crime? Well, again, there are financial interests. Nord Stream 2 never went online, but it was going to go online. And when it did go online, it was going to bypass Ukraine. In other words, these gas transit fees of Ukraine, I think it was, the statistic is about $1.2 billion of gas transit fees were paid to Ukraine by Russia because some of its pipelines passed through Ukraine. But if Nord Stream 2 had gone online, it wouldn't have gone through Ukraine, and therefore it would have deprived Ukraine of all this transit fees, the revenue from the transit fees. Ukraine and Russia are, of course, at war, so anything to weaken Russia, Ukraine is, of course, in favor of. And, according to the data from our expedition, there was a mistake in the attack. Some smaller amount of explosives were used than thought. Slabs of explosives or bulk charges were used, which are more rudimentary and primitive. So it may have been a smaller operation and a less sophisticated operation than previously reported. And you probably know that one of the hot theories surrounding Nord Stream is that 6 people on a small boat called Andromeda sabotaged the pipelines. There were 6 people on a boat, and one person was identified as a current member of the Ukrainian military, and these people used this smaller boat, which would, in probably a less sophisticated operation. And this is one of the things that particularly German investigators are really zeroing in on, whether it was this team of 6 people, at least one of them identified as a current member of the Ukrainian military, and these were supposedly, they're being reported, they're being called pro-Ukrainian, anti-Putin, a team of people on the boat, 6 people. Is Poland the saboteur? Well, again, there's financial interest. There is something called the Baltic Pipe. This Baltic Pipe was inaugurated, not joking, on September 27th, 2022, the day after the sabotage. Poland inaugurated this new pipeline called the Baltic Pipe, and it transports Norwegian gas through passing across the Baltic Sea to Poland. So Poland had huge financial incentive to wanting to see the Nord Stream pipeline sabotaged. The Polish government was also the first government to sanction Nord Stream 2. And there were public statements by Polish officials. I can read one of them to you. Saying, the Polish and Ukrainian foreign ministers, they had written an opinion article titled "Nord Stream 2 has damaged the West enough, time to put into it." As I said, the very day after the sabotage, on September 27, 2022, at the opening ceremony for the Baltic Pipe, the Polish president said, quote, the era of Russian domination in the gas sphere is coming to an end. So it might have been Poland. Also, German investigators and German reporters are now saying that the Andromeda definitely passed, it used a Polish port, if it is indeed the Andromeda that is behind the sabotage. Do all 3 countries play a role? Well, I don't know if any of you have seen, and someone could maybe answer me, has anyone ever read the Agatha Christie mystery called it is the famous one. It was mystery. Murder on the Orient Express. Has anyone ever read that novel or seen? It was maybe a movie or seen the movie Murder on the Orient Express. Does anyone remember how the novel or the movie ends? Can someone maybe unmute their mic and answer me?
Yes? No? Nobody?
Movie, I think. I don't remember the ending.
You don't remember?
No, everybody did it, right? Yeah, everybody did it.
That's the point, yeah.
Maybe Russia too.
Yeah.
So in the end, they're all guilty, right? So, there are reasons to believe that all of these countries may have played a role in the sabotage. So they might be all guilty. No matter who is behind the sabotage, the United States almost certainly knows who did this. They have something called the Integrated Undersea Surveillance System. This is basically a worldwide surveillance system. It's located in strategically important places at the bottom of the world's oceans and seas, of course, at the bottom of the Baltic also. And this was actually built with the help of Sweden. So Sweden, one of the countries investigating sabotage, also likely knows exactly who did this. This is basically, this surveillance system, it consists of arrays of acoustic sensors that are tethered to the seafloor, and they can analyze engine sounds of surface and subsurface vessels. So the United States almost 100% knows who did this. That's it. Here is some more information. I know that you don't have time to write down these links or anything, so if anyone contacts me on Twitter or email or on my Substack, I'm happy to share any of this information with you. And at this point, I would just like to thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. And ask you, open up the discussion, and ask you who you think perpetrated the most severe act of eco-terrorism and the largest instance of industrial sabotage in history. And if you want to see any of the slides again, please let me know. I can go back to those.
Thanks a lot. Fascinating mystery, and I mean, this is an academic forum, but let's face it, we are all here for the fun. And this was very, very engaging, although it has deep, as you have mentioned. So it's not nothing just for for laughs. It's serious. It affects our lives. It affects our economies. So for those of us interested in science and strategy, in the underwater world, this means necessarily technology and infrastructure. Is really great to see how the nuts and bolts of pipelines work, their vulnerability, and even the challenges and specificities of trying to locate accidents, sabotages, and so on underwater. This case is great to see what is specific about underwater infrastructures that are so central to our current world, be it energy, being information. It's really amazing to see this live, let's say, evolving. There is also, of course, a historical side. As you know, Per Hoxelius has a paper on the history of the Nord Stream pipeline, and it's a very recent history. Number one was built in 2011. Number two was just finished in 2021 and never entered into operation. But it has precedence in that Russia and Berlin, from the Cold War onwards, were trying to trade with gas, jumping over different countries. So they were trying to divert pipelines from countries like Ukraine, Poland, Finland, even Sweden. So it's very interesting that they finally did it through a direct line crossing the Baltic Sea, and it's also very interesting how it has ended, right? Okay, so the floor is open for questions from anyone here in the room or online. Thank you very much again. Maybe just one small question, and I will. Yeah, it's just a clarification. You mentioned the economic impact of the explosions, but there was no gas being traded at the time of the explosions because Nord Stream 1 was closed for maintenance. Of course, the difference is that closing for maintenance is an excuse that you can maybe have for 3 months up a year. This pipeline is permanent. Yeah, which is one of the arguments that people saying it was not Russia usually made. For Russia, closing it for some time makes sense. Destroying it, it's a little too much. But okay, sorry, Jake.
No, Jeffrey wants to say something.
You may need to come.
No, I would rather hear your questions. So I'm happy to hear your questions. And like I said, if if you'd like me to go to another slide or something, that's okay also. Who has a question?
You can probably.
Are we good? Sorry, we had a little technological debacle.
Sabotage.
Yeah.
Is it working?
Can you hear us now?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for this talk. I mean, there were many wonderful things. I'm going to ask a very specific question, actually, which is related to my interest. Two different host blast sites, the two pipelines, which, I mean, I work with a lot of visual material as a historian of science. To me, I don't see anything on those images, and that's usually what happens, right? To understand these kind of scientific images, you need to have expertise. So I would like to maybe invite you to say a little bit more about how you got those images, what you saw on them initially, and then how your understanding of them developed when you started talking to experts.
Great question. Let me put up the images again. Let me put up two of the images. We can compare them. Okay, so yeah, so I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an explosive expert, and I'm not an engineer, and I am not a Navy SEAL, and I've never conducted any of these operations. So, like you, when I took these images to experts, and I showed them to them. They were able to draw accurate conclusions, and this is the key to all of it. Let's talk about this image on the right first. This image on the right. Remember, 3 of the 4 pipelines were destroyed. 1 of the 4, this one on the left, was blown up twice. Okay, 17 at a difference of 17 hours apart. Okay, this one on the right, you can see this clean cut here. Okay, and then this space that there's a missing part of the pipeline. This can measure, because it was cut and broken in many places, not just 3 or 4. These missing parts measure anywhere from 50 to 250 meters. This part on the left, we were able to get exact measurements. Here's one side, here's the other. It's 2.5 meters. By showing this image to experts, they're able to say the amount of explosives were used, where they were placed, and the type of charges. But if you show this image to experts, and you say, well, there's a missing part that's 250 meters or even 50 meters, they don't know exactly where the bombs were placed, the type of explosives that were used, because of these large rupture sites. Secondly, they also don't know, because this here on the right, this is actually not, and this is the key to understanding it, I should have said this more clearly before. This is not a blast site. This is not an explosion site. In other words, this is not where the bomb was placed. This is a rupture site. The damage you see on the right here was caused by the depressurization of the gas. The pipeline broke because of the gas. Because again, of that metaphor that if you have a hose with water and you release it, it starts to dance around and jump around, and then it can break. So this, what you see here, is not even the result of explosives or bombs, and therefore it is impossible to say where the explosives were placed, how many kilograms of explosives were used, and the type of charges that were used. Does that, feel free to tell me if that didn't answer your question clearly. One site is a site that the damage is not primary damage from explosive. It is damage from the depressurization of the gas. One is like a break, like this, and the other one is a piercing or an explosion that went like this.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I mean, that I'm very happy with that answer. It explains a lot. I understand the images better now. The one thing that first part of my question was what did you see initially? Did you see initially that that part on the right was a hole, or was that something you needed to?
No, the drone operator had to go up and down the pipeline to find this because it's only 2.5 meters. So it took us a while to find that. But when we found it, we were saying, this is it. This is the key to understanding the operation because this is a depressurized site and it's a small hole and you can draw accurate conclusions. We're very excited. And we also know that that one is, like I said, on the seam. It's on the costura, it's on the seam. So we know we were very excited. It was not easy to find. It took us some time. It took our drone operator time going up and down the pipeline to find it 80 meters deep. That's an awesome question.
Yes, yeah, I have two different questions. The first one is, I think, more concrete. You mentioned briefly like the possibility of private actors being involved in the attack because of the smaller size of the charges and so. And it's something I hadn't considered, and I would like to invite you to develop that a bit more. Like, you mean criminal groups acting without without the knowledge of nation states, or just private military companies? I don't know. It's something I'm wondering. And the second question would be, how has your understanding of the case changed at the light of the evidence? Because at the end, when thinking about the main choices, it was a lot of what financial incentives they have or what geopolitical goals may have that was only tangentially linked to the evidence in the area. Thank you.
Great question. First, I should say that I personally do not know who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. I'm just going to tell you what we discovered on the expedition. We discovered that there was a mistake, probably a mistake. One line was blown up twice by accident. It wasn't intentional, probably not intentionally. We discovered there were far smaller amounts of explosives used than previously reported. We discovered that the bomb was placed on the seam. We discovered that these were, at least at one of the blast sites, these were not shaped charges or these, more sophisticated charges, shaped or linear charges. They were probably just bulk explosives. I also interviewed some divers, and they said an 80-meter dive deep is very difficult and dangerous, but it could be done, and they said they have done it. And it may have been a smaller boat that was used. These things lead me to believe that it may have been a smaller team of people that did this in a less sophisticated operation. It doesn't necessarily mean Ukraine did it or the United States did it or Poland did it. But that is just what our data indicates. This is just my personal opinion. This has nothing to do with the data. Personally, from what I've learned regarding the geopolitical incentives, the economic incentives, the geopolitical motivations, the type of the operation it was, my personal opinion is that it was probably Ukraine carried this out, but that the US probably helped them, and the US probably was happy about it. And the US, certainly, as I said, about their surveillance systems and their intelligence and the sophistication of their intelligence capabilities. I would be shocked if the US didn't know we did this. I interviewed a member of the German parliament who sits on intelligence committees, and he told me, I'm going to paraphrase, but he told me something like this. He said, Jeffrey, this is the Baltic Sea. It's the most heavily monitored and trafficked body of water on the planet. He said, this is not Mars. We know who did this. And I was thinking just the other day, remember that when the 9/11 attacks of 2001, when the World Trade Center was sabotaged, the United States knew who did this minutes after the attack. It's now been over a year, and everyone's saying, we don't know. That doesn't seem believable to me that people don't know who did this. I personally do not know who did it. Did that answer your question? I can't hear you.
Well, that's not on.
Was that is there anything, was that sufficient answer to your question? Was that clear?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm still wondering if you could develop more about the private actors. What do you mean by that?
If I understood you correctly, if I could develop whether or not it was a state or not or non-state actor, is that correct?
Actor hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know whether it was a state or non-state actor. What we do know now, because of the data from our expedition, is that this was a less sophisticated and complicated operation that was previously performed. We don't know if a nation state sponsored it or not. What I can say though is that nation states like the United States, with their intelligence capability and their surveillance capability, it is 99.9% they know exactly who did this and how it happened. And probably Sweden knows, and probably Germany knows also. And probably most large Western nations, that would be my understanding. I believe that Russia probably knows also. So whether it was a nation state or not a nation state, we don't know. But I think we can say 99% certainty. Top nation states know who did this.
Okay, so I wanted to ask actually a bit of a more, I guess, political question or theoretical question. Considering this is not a new strategy, sort of since we've had underwater infrastructure, a sort of bellic strategy has been to sabotage other nations or owners of it, and so it's to link a little bit with what Lina was saying. Is a very sort of vulnerable type of infrastructure, but at the same time very efficient, cost efficient, and it's better for the environment from some points of view. But what can this tell us about the future of underwater infrastructure? Because and more to the point, the future of national sovereignty and territoriality and sort of border control, because it exists and it's there and it's for the taking. And I'm quite surprised that this hasn't happened before, or this doesn't happen on a more regular basis. And so what is that sort of bizarre dichotomy where we're facing the ocean, we don't really seem to be as fierce and nationalist against others as we would on land?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The darkness of the deeps, the mystery of the deeps. Are we more aggressive? Are we more fierce? Are we more diabolical when we think that you can't see what we're doing? I mean, the point is well taken. It's probably accurate. In terms of what this means for the future of undersea critical infrastructure, I'm going to give you a very honest answer. I don't know. I am not a geopolitical analyst or specialist. I'm certainly not a scientist like many other people in the room, or studying the history of oceanography or the history of science. But this is something that can be done. This is not only within the capability of nation states, it's within the capability of non-nation states. I interviewed a member of the European Parliament, and he sits also on intelligence committees. And he is a Dutch member of the European Parliament. And I asked him that question. I said, could a non-nation state have done this? And he said, Jeffrey, I can't give you details, but I used to work with the Dutch government and the American government, with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency of the United States. And he says that some of these cartels, these drug cartels from South America, they have submarines now. They use submarines, and he said, quote, almost military capability to smuggle drugs across borders and into the United States from the Caribbean, South America to the southeast coast of the United States. So I guess what this can tell us is that things are extremely vulnerable, and they're not just vulnerable military sponsored by nation states, they're vulnerable by non-nation states. I think the only thing, and again to repeat the point, is that if nation states are really interested in telling us who did this because of their surveillance or intelligence capabilities, they can do that. But I found it shocking that this guy, a Danish member of the European Parliament told me, Jeffrey, he said these big drug cartels, they have submarines now. I thought that was amazing. I hope I answered your question. I can't answer it specifically, but I can at least comment on it. Feel free to ask a follow-up question if I didn't answer it.
No, thank you. This is giving me interesting inspirations.
Of the YouTube.
Wait, go
Clara
ahead.
has a question.
No, you have to go again because you.
Okay, sorry about that. I was saying that Jeffrey, you had told me that you had to leave around this hour, so we are going to call it a day. I think if people have more questions, you can ask them in the YouTube commentary section, or you can go to Jeffrey directly on his Twitter or email. Yeah, I think again, it's a fascinating case for us historians to think with. So thank you very much, Jeffrey, for your insights and for making it so mysterious, which it is. So thanks a lot.
It was quite an honor to be here in Sevilla, Maravilla.
All right, see you everyone soon.
Thanks so much for having me.